Hey guys, welcome to a feature of Contest Prep University. I'm Joe Klemczewski here with Coach Ryan Conley. And for those of you who do not know Ryan, he is the strength director, coaching director for LoCo Fit. So if you happen to know Lauren Conlon, that is her organization. And Ryan helps her coaches and their clients with all of the strength training and hypertrophy needs. And Ryan, I got to say that anybody who does know me, they're going to think nutrition. That's what Joe does. But I started out in orthopedic physical therapy. That's what I did. And I planned on doing that for my entire career. Immediately after college, I did the CSCS exam through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So back in their infancy, this was early 90s stuff when you may not have even been alive.
1990.
But all right. So you were on the scene. You were on the scene. But this is actually what got me into this entire sport and this entire industry. And long before I went into graduate school and started my trek into nutrition, I just loved lifting. I mean, I was in the gym by the time I was 11 years old, and I've just never stopped. So hypertrophy, strength, everything that you can dig your fingers into, I've been absorbing this stuff for now going on 40 years. So I love to sit down and talk to guys like you who are much more current in the research than some people are, because I've got some props and stats here to go over with you, because things change that quickly, and there just has never been more prolific research being done in this industry, and you're a guy living it. I mean, clearly you're a power lifter. You've got your own game going on there. So what I hope to do today is, first of all, talk from a coaching perspective, because most clients who are working with coaches like you or with contest prep coaches, they want to look their best, but there obviously has to be a foundation of strength and performance there. So before we go any further, let's dig a little bit deeper into who you are and what you enjoy. What was your background getting into training, and where are you now?
So one of my favorite nicknames I think I gathered the past couple of years was Mr. Conlon or Mr. Lauren. That was my favorite. I'm Mr. Lauren, and I help, like you said, Team LoCo Fit, and I also have a company of my own, anger management strength training. So we just do, I strictly am just training. I don't do any nutrition, as you can tell, my belly. So I think I got involved with weight training I would say resistance training with a middle school age, just doing banded resistance work at a Tae-Kwon-Do school. And then from there into high school, we started lifting weights for performance reasons for wrestling. I fell in love with lifting weights as soon as I actually got a hold of like a rusty barbell. From there, I was actually extremely, extremely lucky that I had a mentor in high school who just happened to be our performance coach, our PE coach. He had a master's degree in exercise science from FIU. He was a Division I shot put thrower, and eventually he was a bench presser of 570 pounds. So I was extremely fortunate just to be lucky enough to stumble into a situation where I had someone who had been there and done that from an education standpoint and a experience standpoint. So I was put into a place where I was immediately learning how to do things the right way from the very beginning. And I didn't know any better until I went off to college. I went to Florida State, and I got a job at the Leach Center, which was the main on-campus rec gym there. And I remember I was the youngest one there. It was freshman summer C. And there was everyone else that was getting the job there was either a junior or senior, or was some kind of older student going into physical therapy or exercise science or whatever their major was. And none of them knew how to do a glute ham raise. None of them knew how to bench properly. There was just an extreme lack of experience. And I came in as an 18-year-old just assuming that everyone had this experience coming into it, and I was wrong. So I was just very lucky and fortunate to start off on a good foot, and I was extremely curious as to how to get better, the same as you. And I just kept reading and learning and trying to ask as many questions as I could for the past 12, 13 years. So.
And are you competing as a power lifter yourself, or Olympic lifter? What was your big?
Yeah. So I've been competing in powerlifting since I think my first meet was 2010. And then I didn't really train for that. I just got invited to it and showed up. And then 2011 was when I actually did like a training cycle that peaked me for the meet. And ever since then, I've been competing usually twice a year. I think I had 1 year where I didn't compete, but besides that, it's usually around 2 competitions per year.
Mm-hmm.
So a while.
Awesome. Awesome. So, you know, back in the day when I was getting started and I was diving into the NSCA as some of my information, Dr. Kramer, a matter of fact, he was one of the founders of the NSCA. Yes. You know, he was to me just one of the big titans of this entire industry. I don't even think you could get a degree called exercise science back then. I think it was just physiology or something. But since that time, and they did have a great amount of research. You can go through the 70s and the 80s, and these guys were pioneering some of the things that we're still doing today. But
was Kramer a runner?
Bill Kramer, I do not know. I know he started working with the Army, and then of course, okay, you know, he was at Ball State. But
yeah, Ball State, yeah, okay,
yeah. I don't know his background as a runner.
I know he's a great exercise scientist. I was just trying to remember his personal background because he's awesome. That's a great mentor to have.
Yeah, I do believe, you know, a lot of his research was with runners, you know, in the Army, looking at the difference between, you know, strictly weight training or weight training with cardio or high intensity, you know, cardio. I mean, all of these tentacles that we still explore today were definitely, you know, part of his genesis back then. But who are some of your big influences now that we've got another generation between him and us? Who do you pay attention to?
Ironically, well, as I mentioned, Coach Jeremy Herring, he was my first mentor in person. And besides that, like I have read some of Kramer's stuff, all of the old time Russian literature guys, but I would say the people that I've looked to and have had the most actual effect on my training history would be Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell, Jim Wendler and 531, and most recently Ed Cohn. But all of these guys have a 50,000-foot view of a training idea, and it's all going to be applied to the individual athlete. There's a structure that they like, and the structure in and of itself is something that the coach is comfortable with, and all of them are comfortable with their programs, and they know how to apply it directly to each athlete individually. And I think that's the most important thing. It's not necessarily the structure itself that's the most important. It's just you knowing where to plug and pull and what variables to do that with. So I think we changed sports in general and how we train. And Ed had a very simplistic approach, and Jim Wendler had a very simplistic approach. And I think I did 531 for a year straight, or maybe even longer. So it was something that you can look at their models and apply them and do something over and over and over and over again, and have a work of art by a year or two down the road where you're like, wow, I actually see the progress that I've made, and it's something that's sustainable and not something that's just going to break you in half immediately. So I think that's the key factor in learning from people that have been able to been there and done that and have done it for a long time at a high level.
Yeah, that's a great segue into what I really want to get into in the heart of our interview today, and that is you know, not only, of course, does individual physiology matter, but I think perceived effort level, and that's why people like Mike Zordos and others have started looking at, you know, reps in reserve and how do we quantify, you know, the most that we can objectively. And you can never be truly objective, but, you know, I remember on my own getting my squat and my deadlift up to 500 pounds, and I'm a pretty small frame guy, you know, 5'8" on my tippy toes, and
those are great lifts.
You know, yeah, well, you know, you know, I was always, my best weight was always around 175. I would compete as a bodybuilder in the 150s. I could get up to maybe 200 pounds in my you know, heaviest off season, but around 175 was my sweet spot. And I started working with a coach who had previously held a world record in the squat. He was a Division I strength coach. He had won 2 back-to-back national titles as a Division I strength coach for his powerlifting team. And I knew he was a good friend of mine, Jeff Sellers, from University of Evansville. He was their coach for a long time, started the whole program. It's quite a Rudy from Notre Dame story. I mean, this guy starts the powerlifting team in a room the size of a classroom with just some donated YMCA equipment, right?
That's amazing. Good for him.
And he ends up, you know, beating powerhouses like Army, Navy, LSU, Nebraska without any scholarship money. He was one of the first people, I think he was the first person to get every single weight class over 600 pounds in the squats, which, you know, back in the 80s
Yeah.
Anyway, he's a good friend of mine, lives here in Evansville. And he said, oh man, Joe, I can, work with me and I can get your squat. We can add 100 pounds to your squat. We can do this, we can do that. And I don't think he understood, the training intensity level that I would bring to the table. So how hard I would train in each single workout. So when he started trying to increase the frequency, I was somebody who was squatting every 2 weeks, and then he wanted to squat twice a week. So quadruple my squat time. And those kind of things, instead of increasing my squat by 100 pounds, my squat went down by 100 pounds. And so there's all of these things that he had learned and he was successful with, and then he's trying to apply them to me, and I'm trying to interpret them from my paradigm, and we're obviously that didn't work. So to your point, we have all of these variables: frequency, duration, intensity, what lifts you're going to do, complementary, ancillary lifts, and the lay person out there just trying to go in the gym and crush a good workout. What do they do? What do they do with all this stuff? So, if you could start out just saying, look, when I assess an individual, here's what I'm looking for in creating their first progression, knowing that word progression is important, because you're not going to create the perfect workout, the perfect plan. This is going to be what you do forever. There's got to be stages to this.
Absolutely. And I think that you hit on it very well with just the word stages in itself. So when I'm looking at a new client, and I have a biased background of powerlifting, I enjoy powerlifting. And I do think that, functional, if you want to call it that, whatever, humans have motor patterns, and in real life, you pick stuff off the ground, you squat down, you don't really bench press, but that's neither here nor there. It's cool. So I enjoy making sure that people have proper motor patterns to be able to do hip hinges and axial loaded things, like just be able to execute these lifts properly before we start adding in other variables. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that people do is they jump into a program and they're already looking for the progression of weight wise, which, yes, adding weight, adding volume, all of those are going to allow you to get better, but you have to make sure the fundamentals are sound and that they're there and that they're moving properly. They're not overloading the joints in a manner that's not allowing the muscles and tendons to work. Because if the joints are in a position to where they're just getting beat to shit, then you're not going to be able to add weight and you're not going to be able to add volume, and you will regress exactly like what you had experienced. And it might not have been that you weren't able to squat twice a week. It was just that you went from squatting every 2 weeks to twice a week in a very short time frame, and your work capacity wasn't there, or even the capacity of the tendons, or something might have been off with the squat form. But it's just going to be an individual basis on where are they coming from, what is their background, what's their training history, and where are they currently at. Even if I get somebody that was extremely strong and knew how to lift, has great motor patterns, like perfect scenario. Somebody comes back from like an off season or something, they haven't really trained very hard, they're out of shape. You can't just throw them right back into, maximal weight for them or some high set volume program. Like, you have to build them back up. So it's really a matter of looking at their sport training age and where they're at currently right now when they're at your doorstep and they're saying, hey, train me. I have to look at you and see, how are you moving? What is your current work capacity? And where do we go from here? Because progression is making you better from today to tomorrow. It's not best all time ever, nonstop staying peaked all the time. It's just, it's never going to work that way. And you know that, smart coaches know that. You have to work with the foundation that you have right here, right now, in order to make progression. And it's going to be a long-term thing.
Mm-hmm. So in Indiana, the West Side Barbell Club has definitely had an influence because of just proximity. A lot of the people that I've trained with in my own gym and so forth have gone over there to do some training. And so I've grown up, so to speak, seeing a lot of their methods, and a lot of it is creating some of those auxiliary movements where you're not going to necessarily deadlift every week or twice a week. That may be a lift you do once a month, but you're doing all kinds of pull throughs, hamstring work, glute ham raise, all that kind of stuff. So when you're looking at somebody's ultimate goal, and it could even be a bikini competitor, if she just has to build as much muscle as possible, and her frame is going to need that extra effort, are you always looking at a strength base? Is that the foundation of what you're doing, and then you're putting everything around it?
So I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't note that in the prior discussion. So the goals obviously are the most important. So if the exercise or progression or whatever you want to call it, if it doesn't fit what their goals are or what their current capacity is, then I'm not going to push and I'm not going to force something to work. Like I said, I'm biased with the main list just because it is something that overloads a lot of muscles for one exercise. So it's just a great bang for your buck. And so I would prefer to put those in, but I'm not going to force it if it's not there. So usually how I do program for most people is a main compound lift. So an upper or lower body exercise is going to be the main lift for the day. Usually a secondary exercise that's going to be either a variation of it. And the intent is going to be different on the block. So I will put people through strength phases just for them to do something different. Usually that has some kind of there's mechanisms behind that anyways, where you're doing some kind of training stimulus and you just, the stimulus doesn't work very well anymore. So we try something else different. So we can do a strength block, which is usually not something that most bikini competitors do. So they can usually get pretty good progress with that. They start to put weight on the bar. We can have a little bit more, maybe more accurate numbers to work off of for hypertrophy blocks. And then the secondary exercise, instead of being, if my bench press is stalled out and I'm trying to hammer my triceps because my lockout sucks, I'll be doing board presses. They would be doing it for hypertrophy, not necessarily for strength phases normally. Like I'm looking for it as a hypertrophy stimulus more so than just gaining strength. And then after that, yeah, it's going to be hammering accessory lifts, a ton of single joint or easier exercises that aren't going to beat the body down. So I usually don't like to take compound lifts to maybe if they're going to do one really challenging set, like maybe a 9 RPE, but I'm never going to where they're going to possibly miss. So 9 RPE is going to be the heaviest, but usually it's sub-maximal. So 5, 6 RPE, maybe less, maybe 7, but there might be one hard set of 9. And then after that, it's just going to be get as much volume in as you can in a manner that's not going to beat you to death. Get a pump. So I want them to leave the gym feeling like they've thoroughly worked hard. They've lifted some weights that they're mechanically challenging, and then they also had some metabolic damage from doing pump and getting blood flow throughout the muscles that they maybe not necessarily, you won't get the pump from a compound lift, but go do some tricep pushdowns. So things like that are mainly the structure that I like to stick with. Don't kill them, allow them to progress slowly and sustainably over time.
Well, that's a great moderate approach. Obviously, very custom and assessment, perspective from that particular client. But I will say, besides having the West Side barbell influence here, and we also had all the Russian and Romanian coaches that were influencing them. Mm-hmm. So that was my background growing up into the sport. But then along came some of the divisions maybe in physique sport, like when NPC started doing figure and then all the way down to bikini. And so there were other prominent coaches within the NPC and IFBB who would do just the opposite. So I would look at these particular females lifting protocols, and they would have 100 different types of lunges with 1,000 reps, and that's just what they did 52 weeks a year. Now flash forward, and there's been such an influence of powerlifting and just strength training in our sport that some people just love it. And I do. I mean, there are bikini and figure competitors who in their off season, they just love to powerlift. They may be going to powerlifting meets. And so do you see that creates some kind of an advantage in real muscular density, in just athleticism, or is it neither here nor there for you?
No, this is it's a cool question. I think we all ask that question too. I think that it's obviously multifactorial, but I look at old time physiques, like you look at Arnold, you look at Louis Ferrigno, look at Dorian, like all of those guys trained extremely hard and they used compound lifts, and all of them had their, variation within their training structures. But they all did compound lifts. Now Dorian did his later in the training session where he would do leg press first, leg extensions, and then squat or whatever. So it doesn't really matter to me so much of the order of operations, but I think that there is some kind of density I think that you get from just lifting heavy weights. I don't know what it is. I don't have any scientific evidence to prove that. But if you're doing something that is going to nail 4 or 5 different muscle groups all at once, I just can't imagine that it not having a positive systemic effect positively on the system. And I think that it's also psychologically, it gives them a different goal to hit instead of being so oriented towards what they look like and how people perceive them and stuff. Like they can just go in and focus on the work. And I think that that's really something that gets lost a lot in the physique world, or at least people that are coming into the physique world. They're so used to competing and they want that goal and to get on stage, and that's their ultimate crown, which is awesome. I mean, most people like competing, most people enjoy it. I love competing, but the real work and the real change comes in the gym, and you have to train. So if you're just going in and doing a million different sets of lunges, I mean, you probably have pretty good flexibility and you probably have some pretty good endurance and type 1 fibers, but you're not going to be able to progressively improve that. You're going to do 1,000 lunges. What are you going to do? 1,002 the next day? Like there's a point of diminishing returns for everything. And if you're just doing body weight exercises and bullshit plyo boxes that don't do anything for the stimulus that they're looking for, all they're really doing is jump training, you're just burning calories at this point. So
now the 2 things that you brought up there that I think are worth at least touching on before we move on is number one, genetics. There are some people who have such amazing genetics that, yeah, they could just jump around and they're going to develop, muscle tissue that's 10 times greater than anybody else. But then you also have kind of the hormone theory and a lot of this in nutrition and training, a lot of these old conventional wisdom pieces that we just thought were part of the ironclad literature are being questioned now. And is it really a growth hormone response or a testosterone response, or is it actually just at the fiber level, the mechanical response?
Yep.
And this is what I mean by there's just a proliferation of new research coming out, and I'm excited. I mean, I think the next 10 or 20 years is going to tell us a lot, but it's also hard to discount what we know anecdotally. You just brought up people like Dorian and Arnold and Franco and these guys who lived it, and this is how they trained, and even within their variants, you can see some commonality even ourselves. I mean, I've been training for 40 years. You've been training for probably 20.
And you're pretty jacked, so.
What works and what doesn't, right? And even if you take into account your own, physique differences and genetic uniqueness, there are just things that you can see as you start working with a couple hundred clients and a couple thousand clients and tens of thousands of clients that, man, these threads just exist.
Yeah.
We're all mammals. We're all Homo sapiens. Our physiology is not that different.
Yes.
So no matter what genetic base you have, this is what's going to maximize that.
Yes, I agree. I think I really am a big fan of the mechanical aspect of it. Something that I've seen recently, I think Andy Galpin's lab, or maybe it wasn't Galpin, but he had brought it up, was the difference between central nervous system fatigue and peripheral fatigue. And basically the idea that we've kind of have that backwards now. We always thought that a max effort lift, like you're doing a heavy squat single, that's going to tap into the central nervous system. And that's what the feeling is. Like I know everyone that has powerlifted or lifted heavy knows what that drained, dead feeling is when you get in your car and you're like, your brain's not functioning. You're not sure if you're going to be able to drive home right. We always call that central nervous system fatigue. What they're looking at now is I think it's more peripheral fatigue. And the central nervous system actually gets fatigued more from high endurance work, aerobic work, fast-paced things. So a marathoner would actually have more central nervous system fatigue than a powerlifter. So I think it's still the same sensations. It's still the same things we have to deal with. It's really just at this point figuring out the mechanisms behind them so that you can apply things appropriately. And I think that is a very important concept. Yeah, we'll see if the growth hormone and the testosterone and the hormonal theories come about. But regardless if it does or does not, we know that for the most part, if you can do a compound lift, you can, and your body frame is suitable to execute it properly. If you're doing a barbell row and you feel it in your lats, like from the insertions to the origins, you have a good contraction there, then why don't we use that? Because even if it's a systemic response hormonally where you're getting testosterone or growth hormone or whatever, or you're able to load something heavy enough to cause damage in the fibers and just use mechanical work, either way, all roads lead to Rome. I don't care what the mechanism is besides the reason of the why for the prescription. So I think that these things will be parsed out in the near future. And yeah, the research that's been coming out has been super cool. I know Zordos, Helms, Galpin, all of those labs and some others have been putting out some really cool stuff, and they're putting in a lot of effort into figuring out the reasons why. So hopefully,
Yeah, it's especially because you can't just do a one-off study and say, "Oh, we just proved something." You got to have some arc to it and some time and multiple studies and testing different variables. But you made me think of something as you're talking about the hormone response. I know even going back to some of Kramer's research in that era, when they started looking at the different types of cardio and saying, okay, HIIT training, and I mean maximum HIIT training, can increase growth hormone response by 1,000% or different things like that. Even metabolically, that just became the law. Okay, so that's the best way to do it. But now people are starting to say, well, what does that even mean? So so that is an acute response. But what if we do something maybe sub that level, but multiple times? And so now we're talking about frequency versus intensity. And so all of these variables keep coming back into play. And you're gonna know charts like this that just show the training response. This is just an old time normal chart.
Yes.
Here's a training response. And so the level of training you go, this would be called a normal training response. This could be called overtraining. And then you get up to the point where, okay, now your performance is at a better level. So obviously if you're going to train again down here and then get that next response and that next response, that's where overtraining can be induced. So you just have to look at all of these variables and say, okay, with this combination of work that I'm doing, intensity, duration, frequency, am I allowing myself to get back to that place where now I have a good recovery base to train again, or am I just digging myself a deeper hole? So going back to my story of my own, attempts to get up to a 600 or 700 pound deadlift and squat, I will say that my mechanics are fantastic for some reason. Just the way I'm built, I can move really, really well. And I was always training with a lot of intensity. So even in a week I wasn't squatting, I was doing all kinds of giant sets with 1,000, 1,500 pound leg press and hack squats and things like that. Just stupid stuff that I'm paying for now. But the goal was, even in my mind back then, going back to the 80s, I want to train and stimulate these fiber types this way and then give them enough of a break to recover. But I still want to be in the gym often enough. So I want to hit every single workout with maximum intensity, maximum effort. And so if I can do that with my legs today, then I'm going to do that with my chest tomorrow. And, you get into some of the kind of bro splits and looking at different angles. If you were reading Flex magazine back then and the bodybuilders and all that, not understanding, the functional anatomy, how motor pattern recruitment works. But when you look at those kinds of things between intensity and duration and frequency, how do you hold somebody back and say, this is what you need for your best results?
I look to see exactly where they're at when they show up with me, and I look to see how intense the session is per session per week. How hard is that each individual session? How much volume are they doing? I'm going to quickly look to just at volume. I quantify as sets times reps. So I'm going to quickly look to see how many sets they're doing that are work sets, about how many exercises, just how the organization is, like what is the order of operations, when are they doing their squat, if they're squatting or whatever the exercise is it first, is it third, is it last? I'll play with things like that. But mainly I want to see, are they making progress with where they're at? Is the frequency adequate, or is it too much? Is it too high? A lot of times what I'll see, at least with the bikini competitors, is they come in and they want to work out nonstop. And that's okay. I mean, you can almost make anything work. It's possible. But for the most part, if I want to create a actual response and load them and make some kind of weekly progressions, I don't want you training 6 times a week. Like it can happen. Like right now I have a girl doing 4 days a week of all legs just because she was in a car accident with her upper body. She can't use her shoulders. So I had to be extra creative and make sure that I'm not destroying her while she's still able to progress. So I want to see if they're making progress, and then I'm just going to watch to see how they're moving, because how they're moving, unlike you, some people just don't move well. And if we're trying to add weight and add frequency on something, and they're just going to compound the problem. So number one is where they're at. Are they making progress? How are they moving? I want to see video footage of how they're lifting. And then number three, I want to see their weekly accumulated fatigue. Like, how do they feel subjectively? And I'm going to look objectively at the numbers to see if the numbers are trending upward, if the RPE is trending up or down. And then I'm going to make adjustments on a weekly basis to see, do we need to stay what I would call in like a step load. So say they're, especially, this is something I use a lot with females in like overhead press work or some kind of upper body work, because they're just, the percentages themselves, the weights are smaller. So adding a 5-pound jump per week is not going to be sustainable for a very long time. You're just going to max out. So we'll stay in a step load pattern of maybe doing 60 pounds for 2 or 3 weeks with the same sets, same reps, allow the body to adapt, and then add another 5 pounds, drop a rep, whatever it is. So that you're really just trying to fit the program to where it fits their recovery, it fits their job, it fits their personality. And eventually when you start putting these pieces of the puzzle together and they start giving you feedback, when they're like positive feedback, and then you really get rolling and you see the trends start to pile up and pile up and pile up, then you know that you have something that's sustainable. And then all you have to do after that is just start tweaking small things. So it's a lot of upfront work to like be creative and to plug and pull the right things and make sure they're moving properly. They're doing a thorough warm-up. Warm-ups are huge. And then at the end of the day, once you kind of get this picture, not a picture perfect, but you get an idea of where they're at, now you can start pushing and starting to load and add volume. And then you make small changes as necessary to fill in the little gaps here and there. And that's what I've seen the best progress with.
And I think that's probably what's exciting for both the clients and the coaches is knowing that, okay, we are moving forward, this progression, and we're adding, we're doing more. But there is a time where you have to pull back.
Yes.
And there, you know, the trend today among a lot of exercise science literature and coaches is just more frequency. You know, and I've heard them all describe. I'm friends with Mike Zordos and Helms, and I really love chatting with those guys about what they're doing.
Zordos still squatting every day?
Well, so it's things like that. So the first time I met Mike, he's giving a presentation at a camp that I was presenting at, and yeah, I mean, they were talking about those things. Let's do these tests. Let's see if that can be done, to squat every single day for 30 days. What will happen? And it all brought about that whole rep in reserve type, you know, effort matrix. And it's, you know, he would say, you know, even if we're just in the gym kind of practicing the mechanics and it's just 2 or 3 sets and it's at a you know, 40 or 60% effort level, like that's a workout. So he would have some people, or he's had other coaches now, you know, considering the fact that, you know, we're going to have these workouts, we're going to be in the gym 6 days a week, and some of it's just practicing. But again, there are a lot of people who can't hold back. And I know for me, for example, as soon as I start getting too much intensity in every workout, I almost need to have a day off in between every session. I can't, you know, and so sometimes a 3-day system for me is the home base. If I'm training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but then as soon as I start adding a 4th or a 5th or a 6th day, you know, now all of a sudden you do have to really monitor intensity. So with that trend toward more time in the gym, more frequency, are you finding that a challenge, or is that something that you're okay just manipulating actual intensity?
I like manipulating intensity and volume, because more importantly than frequency, like each session has to be effective. If the session itself isn't effective or it's too much work, then what's the point of adding another session? Like, you're just going to do subpar work again. I don't give a shit. Like, I don't need them to just do more work for the sake of doing more work. I want to see you make progress. So if you need to do more work to make progress, then we can make that happen. But most people don't need more work. I mean, at least the literature that I've seen, 1 time a week is better than no times a week of training. And 1 time a week is good. Twice a week is probably a little bit better for muscle and hypertrophy and strength. 3 times a week, maybe a little bit better, but now the point of diminishing returns is already creeping up. And anything beyond that is negligible at best. So I think once or twice a week of even now squats and deads are going to be a lift that a lot of people treat similarly. Obviously they're not totally similar, but they're going to work a lot of overlapping muscle groups. So I'll treat that as a lower body main lift, and you don't have to squat twice a week. Like, I might have someone do a barbell squat or a front squat or a box squat, whatever is the main lift one day. The second day, they might just be doing kettlebell goblet squats or lunges or leg press. Like, you're still getting the muscles worked without having to potentially antagonize the joints or antagonize recovery. I don't see the need to, once you know how to squat, the learning curve, it's a double-edged sword. Technique is always going to be something that you have to hound on. Even myself, I need people to tell me to fix things every once in a while. Like, you just forget stuff, or like you're not aware of what you're doing. Maybe my toe is flared out more than normal. Maybe my back's a little tight. I'm not getting under the bar as well. My pecs are tight. There's always going to be a need for technical reinforcements and cueing and making sure that you're doing something properly. But at the same time, once you know how to squat, if there's no issues, like none of these little things are going on, like I already know how to squat. I don't need to squat 4 times a week just to do 50% work. Now, is there a time and place for that? Yeah, if someone's coming into the sport and they have never squatted before, then yeah, making sure their motor patterns are fine, they're moving well. And you can do that a couple times a week just for them literally to get the nervous system to understand where the body is in time and space and how to move in a squat, because they're just not used to doing it. So it's a technical skill more so than a muscular strength and hypertrophy stimulus, in my opinion, is where I would drop things like that. And some people can recover better. So if they like recovering, if they can recover better and they can handle higher frequency training, then you can put in 3 days of delt work. But eventually, like John Meadows likes to cycle things in and out, where he would have potentially a training cycle or two of 3 days a week delt work. And then the next training cycle might be 3 days a week of hamstrings. So the delt work drops back down to twice. So there's ways you can play with these things. But I'm not a huge frequency prescriber just for the sake of prescribing frequency.
That's awesome, because I believe that as well. But again, my field of practice is limited to just quite a few less people than you, as well as just myself. But I do have a question in terms of fiber type training, and my brain was formed again on saying, okay, if you're going to train for something, train for that one thing maximally. So it's for strength, then that whole session or that whole week, that whole emphasis, it's on strength. Mm-hmm. So then if I can go in the gym and do something with maximum intensity. And I grew up in an era where there were, a lot of debate between, of course, Mike Mentzer was bringing back the heavy duty type
training. Yeah.
And then there was also just, even before that, you can go back into the 50s and 60s, and there was kind of the heavy week and the light week. And one of my first adaptations personally was to say, okay, if I have a heavy week, and I understand the kind of drain you're talking about, when you've done maximum deadlifts, maximum push press, all that kind of stuff, like you physically feel like you've been hit by a truck for 3 or 4 days or longer. But at the same time, you could train with higher intensity and hit those more, anaerobic muscle fibers differently. And so I just became notorious for having that kind of nonlinear periodization where I may be doing heavy squats and heavy deads this week, but then, as I mentioned, it could be just a 50 rep giant set with stiff-legged deadlifts and hack squats into leg press and just some pretty maniacal things. and my goal was maximizing intensity for those slow twitch muscle fibers, which arguably have more room for hypertrophy
improvement. Yeah.
And it was just kind of, it's fun, right? It's your gut check. It's your time to get in the gym, and you're also training your mental capacity just to endure pain and to progress. So am I just crazy? Is that a bygone kind of principle, or do you still find value in that?
You're definitely crazy. Now, this is something that I still am kind of undecided on. I think that it's always what you can recover from, right? So even with your nonlinear periodization there, you were able to make it work for you. So 1 week you were going heavy, the next week or the next training session you had higher rep death sets. So I think that, like I said, I really think you can almost make anything work. And if you're training really freaking hard and you're sleeping and you're eating, you're going to make progress. And I think that at the level of, would I have a client do it? Probably not. Would I play with it? Or maybe someone that I trust, like a training partner that I'm helping out or something, like maybe I'd allow them to do it. But I definitely see that as maybe a young man's game. Because I trained pretty similar for a while. You know, you just go in and you just kill everything. And I think maybe that does build up a work capacity and a base that will allow you to make progress in the future. And it does allow you to accept pain and like deal with pain. Because I don't want people. I was having this conversation with Ed Cohn and my buddy the other day. I asked him if he chased pain, where with he was doing accessory sets or his squat or anything, and he said no, he never chased pain. He just didn't run away from it. So he was always able to control his squats and his main lifts. He always was not under the impression, he was never going to miss a lift in training. It wasn't going to happen. He was always confident that he would make the lift. And he may be uncomfortable with the weight or may not feel fabulous that day, but he was always going to get it. And then you see him doing his accessory work. And if he felt good that day, he pushed it, and he pushed it hard, like 9, 10 RPE, blowing your face off on tricep pushdowns. And if he was a little injured or wasn't feeling it, then he would back off and do something that would allow him to recover and hopefully get better next week or whatever it was. So I think that's really more the outlook of where I would program that is the individual athlete has to be able to feel where they're at that day in that training session and know if they and know the consequences of if you push brutally hard, it might affect tomorrow's workout or the workout 2 days later. But if you're willing to take that chance, which I think for people that are just meatheads like us, I think that most of us want to feel that challenge sometimes. So I kind of would like clients to learn that and seek that out on their own. I think that that's something that it's hard to describe that exact sensation without you just wandering off into the void on your own and like finding that place to like really push yourself. So I think that's a complicated question.
You know, I will say, Ryan, too, that my pursuit was always for strength. I mean, I was, you know, even as a bodybuilder, that was my goal, was to improve in strength. So I knew I couldn't squat heavy all the time. And I know there are ways to modulate that. You can do box squats, you can do other kinds of things and still stay in that heavy realm. But I would do high intensity type work like that because I knew I could recover faster. It was more intense in the moment. There was a lot of pain, but 3 days later, I was way more recovered than had I done a heavy squat. So every time I would then have that squat, it was like you said about Cone. I never missed a lift. I mean, even people who were coaching me, they knew if they said this is the deadlift or the squat, the record we're going for, like Joe would never miss a lift because the technical aspects were there, and I was always that defiant with my recovery. I was doing everything to make sure I was ready for that lift. But at the same time, I unfortunately see a lot of people taking the emphasis of today's, gym time and frequency of just reinforcing what you said, which is bad training. If you're not recovering, why are you back in the gym?
Yeah. And it's funny because it's almost like two completely different mindsets where you see some of the literature coming out of like higher frequency, higher volume, like that's the end all be all. And you'll be prescribing, in order to do that, you have to be at a sub-maximal RPE, less than 5 or 5, 6, whatever. You're leaving reps in the tank. Well, the number one issue with that is a lot of people don't know what a 10 RPE is. They have no idea. So if I'm prescribing that or someone else is prescribing that, they could be doing a 0 RPE. Like it could be a warm-up set, or it could just be so far away from failure. But so there's an issue with that there. And then on the other side of the spectrum is the CrossFit mentality of do another rep regardless of your spine or regardless of how fatigued you are or whatever. So I think those are like two completely opposing philosophies right now, that they're at the far ends of the spectrum. And I think that neither one of them are correct. They need to be brought in a little bit. But those would be right now in today's age and time, that's where I see the challenge sets where you're going to potentially pass out is a lot of the CrossFit mentality, and the just go in and work out every single day, twice a day mentality, but don't push too hard, is with some of the sub-maximal high frequency, like Norwegian study type stuff and things like that. So I think, and again, you can make anything work, but like intelligent programming is always going to reign supreme over just ideologies, in my opinion.
Well, and you're making it abundantly clear why coaching and programming is important. And, when I started in this field back in the day, coaching didn't even exist. you could argue that my early articles and so forth, and the fact that I was the first online full-time coach, created all of this. Now you've got strength coaches coming behind doing the same thing. Now you've got guys like you who are making, complete careers out of helping people train. And nothing could be better from my perspective, not just from the technique analysis and the correct programming, but just the guidance, for people, even in our own company, people who are hiring us for contest prep, to know that they're getting training support from amazing, exercise science backed coaches it's undeniably almost an essential part of their game now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And thank you for, laying the foundation for some of this stuff. I mean, you've been quite the scholarly man and application of everything that you've learned throughout your career, whether it be from your 5 PhDs in orthopedic physical therapy, psychology, training, bodybuilding competitively, being jacked all the time. You've been a great influence for the sport of bodybuilding and strength training and for coaching. So thank you for everything that you've put into this sport.
Well, I appreciate that. I will tell you, it's ironically just as fun now as it was 30 years ago, because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I was just figuring it out, and it was for myself personally, and there was not this type of global industry to plug into. So there was a time, Eric Helms jokingly calls it like the lost decade of Joe. There was a time when I, after I kind of created all that, I walked away because it just, I was done. It wasn't fun anymore. But now there are all these great people like you just exploding the industry in so many different directions that I'm like, man, this is more fun than ever to be a part of it. So, I love having a chance to chat with you, and it's only, making it more fun for me, and hopefully disseminating all the great info to people who need it.
Yeah, I try. Well, I had a lot of fun, and I appreciate you having me on, man.
Okay, man. Well, Ryan Conley, we will put all of your information in the show notes so people can get a hold of you. It is anger management training, right?
Anger management, strength training, and Team LoCo Fit.
Team LoCo Fit, of course. Yep. All right, man. Well, I will be seeing you soon. So,
all right. I'll see you at the Arnold, actually.
Okay. And for those of you watching and listening, definitely check out Ryan's content, everything he's doing down there in Florida, and we will chat with you soon.